So I'll introduce myself. My name is Rowan. I'm Rowan Roberts. I work for a company called Education Development Trust, which is an international organisation working with many countries, obviously including Jordan. And this is Sarah Horrocks, and Sarah is the director of the part of the organisation that we both work for, which is called London Connected Learning Centre. So we are a centre that's based in London, and we work with many different schools in London. And we help to train teachers to use technology, and we do workshops with students, and sometimes we use technology across lots of different curriculum areas, but we also use technology to teach computing and programming education. So today what we're going to be doing is talking you through a selection of tools. They're free tools, and some of them are available to be used on iPads, some of them available to be used on laptops. Just to give you a sense of all of the different ways that it's possible to use technology without having to spend lots of money. So,
yeah, it might need you to work together, but we think that's a really good thing because we encourage children to actually share technology and to collaborate using technology. We're not such believers in one-to-one devices because we think there's value in people collaborating and using technology together.
Thank you. So just to explain a little bit about how the session is going to work, basically I'm going to demonstrate a range of different tools, and then hopefully we'll have about 10 minutes or so to explore some of those tools, and you'll be able to choose which ones you prefer to look at, and that might depend partly on the equipment that's available on your tables, but also thinking about the equipment that might be available to you in your schools, thinking of which tools it's most likely that you will find useful. So before I show you any of the tools we're going to look at, I think it's really important to think about the ways in which the reasons we might use technology in school, and the ways in which we might use it, and how much benefit we can get from those different ways. Because a lot of people feel that sometimes you can spend lots of money on technology and you don't necessarily get very much benefit out of it in terms of the learning outcomes for your pupils. So if you're thinking about spending money on something, it's obviously important to make sure that you know it's going to have value for your students. And at the CLC, we think about this model, which is something which is created by this American academic called Ruben Puentedura. You might have seen it before. It's basically this idea that there are different kind of levels of use of technology in activities in the classroom. And the most basic level is direct substitution. So that's basically where you're using a piece of technology to do something that you could just as well achieve with a piece of paper and pencil. And that's not to say that's never useful, because sometimes it's convenient to use technology. If you have it in the room, it might be easier to use than using a paper and pencil. But it's not necessarily improving the learning outcomes for your students. The next level up would be augmentation, and this is sort of where we're using the technology as a substitute, but it does actually improve the activity in some way. Maybe it makes it easier to access for certain pupils, maybe it makes it more exciting or more interesting, but essentially in terms of their learning, they're still kind of achieving the same thing. The next level is modification. So this is where we're kind of starting to redesign the actual task, the learning experience for the child. And we're changing the way that they interact with the information, perhaps we're changing the way that they're able to be creative. And then right at the top, we've got this idea of redefinition. And that's where we completely transform the learning experience for the child. We enable them through technology to experience a type of learning that they wouldn't otherwise be able to achieve. And it's not necessarily the case that every single activity always needs to fit into that top category, but I think it's really important to be aware of these different ways that we can use technology, and to always be aiming for that kind of the top part of this diagram. Yep.
And I think when you're thinking about this, it's also important to think when you should not use technology. So we at London Connected Learning Centre, we advise schools in using technology, we model using technology for learning, but we also know that there are times when technology should not be used. So we're not just techno-evangelists who say, technology is wonderful, you must use it. It's about choosing very carefully when it can make the difference to the learning, and choosing carefully when you should leave it alone. Over the past few days at the conference, Rowan and I have had some really interesting conversations with you, with colleagues here at the conference, about different contexts and using technology. And we're aware that schools in the UK they all have internet connection, they all have some kind of technology to use. And it's important that we think about different contexts and how much access there may be or may not be in schools. And what we hope to show you today is a range of different tools which could be used in school, in the classroom context, or it may be that you have no access to technology in your classrooms, and it's not possible for all kinds of reasons, for time, for training, for resources, for money. It may be that you can't use technology in your classroom, but the children that you're teaching may have some access to technology at home, even if that's using a big sister's phone. So some of the things that we show you could be used by children from home, and some are for use in the classroom. And at London Connected Learning Centre, we've also thought a lot about entitlement to using technology. And we think a lot about what we call digital disadvantage. Last year, our government did a big report looking at digital literacy in the UK. And they found that if somebody is disadvantaged in life, if they're unemployed, if they are disabled, if they live in social housing, if they have problems, if they live in poverty, they're likely to be doubly disadvantaged because they're likely to have low digital literacy, that they will have lower skills. So we really believe it's something very, very important to us at our centre, that we are working to support opportunities for young people. And so we believe that it's really important for young people to be growing up to be digitally literate. And so it's not, again, that we think the tech is amazing and whizzy. It's that actually those young people have an entitlement to be digitally literate. If they're going to achieve in life, if they're going to be able to access further learning in life, then we need to make sure that they are digitally literate and digitally competent.
Yes, so obviously that digital literacy includes using technology, but it's really important that as well as using technology, which many children are really comfortable with, many children have access to their phones, even if it's their parents' phones, and they're very keen to download apps and to play games and to be active users of technology. But many of those same children, despite being comfortable with technology, they aren't necessarily creating with it. They're not using it in a creative way, they're just kind of absorbing. And it means that they become kind of spectators in this digital world, when we want them to be able to engage with that world, so that as they grow up, they can be the creators of the future, they can be the innovators who create technology that will be used by others. Yeah.
And yesterday, Alan November said something really, really important in his keynote. And he said that the critical thinking is the most important thing that we can do as teachers, support young people, support students in critical thinking. And that is absolutely key. So along with the kind of the digital competency, we want those young people to be able to be critical of information, to understand the information that they're reading on the web, to understand bias. So all of those things that Alan said yesterday are really, really important. So again, a reason for using technology is children, young people are in a world where they're consuming information via technology, so we need to help them with the skills and not assume, as Alan said, that they know how to search, that they have the sophistication in their use of technology.
So to that end, we've we're going to show you quite a lot of different tools today, and then give you a bit of a chance to experiment with some of them. But we've kind of divided them into these 3 categories. So the first one is all about doing research. It's about finding information. In a sense, it's about children as consumers of technology, but sometimes that consumption can be really valuable. Because if you're doing, for example, a research project in school, children need to be able to know how to access information, how to find valuable and reliable sources of information, and how to extract information from that. Just in the same way that they might do with books. The second category is actually making content. So rather than just consuming, how can you use technology to make things? And it might be making things individually, it might be collaborating, but it's allowing them to engage actively in that world rather than passively. And then the third category is about sharing content. So once children have been making things, how can they use possibly online services, possibly apps that they use within their class, to collaborate together, to share their work, to comment on it, and also to allow their teacher to look back over their work and to offer them valuable feedback. So you might also use technology for assessment purposes as well. So those are kind of the 3 broad areas, but there are lots of different ideas within those areas. So to start with finding content, I've got a few different tools that I would like to show you. The first one is Google Earth. Now, I don't know if people are familiar a little bit with any of these Google Maps tools and Google Earth tools. They've been around for a long time, but they're always undergoing changes, they're always undergoing updates. And actually the Google Earth app, which is a browser app, but you can also download it as an iPad app, they've added this feature called Voyages, and it allows you to sort of travel to different collections of places. It allows you to travel to sort of collections of places, and it also provides you with information about those places. So I'm going to just demonstrate now how you might get to that page and what some of those voyages would look like. Lots of satellite imagery that's been taken that has all been kind of stitched together, so it does take a little while to process. But when you first open up the web app, it gives you a little bit of a tour of how to use the tool. I'm actually going to skip that at the moment because I'm going to show you that now. And if you have a look over on the left-hand side, you can see that there is this little kind of steering wheel symbol. And when I go here, it tells me about all of these different collections of locations with information. And it organises them by these different categories. And actually the education section, unsurprisingly, is really useful if you're thinking about using this with schools. So there's all sorts of different kind of, a lot of them are cultural, or they might be to do with history, like the dinosaurs. So let's go to the International Year of the Reef. And then I'm going to dive in. And you can see over on one side it tells me a little bit about some of these locations, and then I can just navigate through using these arrows. So that's taking me to this first place. And it moves you through, and then it actually takes you into imagery that's that's part of Google Street View, which is another thing that I was going to mention. So you can actually look around this coral reef and see things in real life. Another feature of this tool that a lot of people are not aware of is that you can turn this sort of street view experience with the panorama image, you can turn that into a virtual reality experience. Google have an app called Google Cardboard, and they also, you might have seen those devices that come with it. It's like a little cardboard headset, and it turns into a VR headset. And if you have the Cardboard app installed on a mobile phone, and as long as it's a relatively new phone and it's a free app, then you will see, when you visit a page like this, you'll see a little cardboard headset icon in the corner. When you tap onto that, your phone becomes a virtual reality viewer. You can put it into one of those headsets and you can actually look around in this place and you really feel like you're there. So it's a very immersive experience. So if we're talking about how technology can transform learning for our students, I think this is a really good example of how we can use it to give them an experience they could never otherwise have. It's very different. Looking at a picture in a book or even on a screen is very different to feeling like you're actually inside it by using virtual reality. And then just to kind of follow on from that is the Google Maps app. And within Google Maps, again, we can also access Street View, which lets us visit places, makes us feel like we're really there. And I've added a link in here to take us just to see a relatively nearby location, so we can have a look at the options that are available. So if you're familiar with Google Maps, then you might know that as well as the Maps tool itself, there's also an option to go into Google Earth which takes you to those satellite images so that you can see it from above. So at the moment, the map, it tells us a little bit about this place. It's got some symbols on it and it's got the names of some locations, but it's not really that informative. It doesn't give us a strong feel of the place. So if I was using this tool with children, I'd be talking a little bit about how we can read maps, what the different symbols mean, and what we can infer just by looking at an image like this. But then I can click down on the satellite imagery at the bottom, and then of course we can see a lot more about what the character of this place is like. We can learn a little bit about the climate and about the vegetation that's there. But once I see it like that, I can also drag my little yellow man from the bottom corner, and anywhere on this map that has a blue line has Google Street View imagery on it. So if I drag it over here, then I should be able to sort of dive into this map, and then I can explore this place in 3D. And just the same as what I showed you just now, if you have the Cardboard app installed on a phone, you will have the ability to enter this as a virtual reality experience as well. And then you can kind of really get a feel for a place even if you can't visit it in person.
So in the, oh sorry, yeah. And the phone. The app on the phone, yes, and then the little headset, yeah. And just to say that in the English primary curriculum in geography, students have to compare and contrast places. They have to know about where they live. So we do a lot of work with children that come to our centre using Street View and Google Maps, looking at things like the route from their school to our centre, looking at the features, really understanding the place where they live, but also then contrasting it with other places, and that's where Google Earth and Google Street View can be really helpful to have a look at places that they don't know. So it's kind of the starting point is what they do know in life, and we know that for children that's their home, their school, their city, their town.
Yeah, and then just to show you, these are just pictures of the headsets that you could use. There are also a lot of companies have started making headsets that are a little bit more durable, that are made of plastic and things and have kind of harder lenses, and they usually still would cost less than about 20 JD. But these headsets I think cost about 3 or 4 JD, so not very expensive. And then, yes? Sorry? The yellow, when you're in Google Maps, if you're looking at a page in Google Maps, if you so it's just it could be any location. So hit, yeah, it's just down here. Yeah, and then there are other tools in this view as well that you can use to change the way that you're looking at the map. So the next thing I wanted to show you is something which is a bit of a personal favourite of mine, partly because it can be really useful for getting children to think differently about many different locations in the world, also because it's just really good fun. I personally really enjoy using this. Has anybody seen it before? It's called Geoguessr. It uses the same data as what we just looked at, so it uses Google Street View imagery, but it turns it into a game. And the game basically is that you're placed in a random location somewhere in the world, and your job is to use that imagery to sort of drag and look around, look for clues, and see if you can guess where you are. So I'll show you what that looks like. I think I've opened it up. Maybe it's here. So it looks like this. This particular one is the famous places map, which is quite nice because it tends to take you to places that you may have seen pictures of before, so it's a bit more familiar. It might be more accessible for young people. If it's random locations anywhere in the world, you quite often find yourself on the middle of a really, really, really long road in like Western Australia. It's very hard to guess exactly where you are. But I'll show you this example. I wonder what we're going to get. Okay. Any guesses? Machu Picchu. So we must be in Peru. So then I would come over to this map. I would have a little look at Peru, and I'm not going to go into lots of detail now, but I think we're probably about somewhere around there. I can make my guess, and then I will get a score that tells me, that tells me how close I was. So I was reasonably close. This is the right country at least, but not exactly right. And then the more you practice and the more detail you go to, the more time you spend, the better your score. You can also play this in a challenge mode, so you can create a game which you then send the link to lots of people, and then they can all play competitively. So it can be a really fun classroom activity. At the end, it shows you how you got on, and it compares your score to the other people in your class. So some of the locations are a little bit more challenging, and you have to start looking at things like street signs and road names to see if you can work out what language things are written in, and then that helps you to guess what the location could be. So as well as using your your digital literacy and you're using your critical thinking skills, you might also be using knowledge of different cultures and knowledge of languages to help you guess where you might be.
And again, in our primary curriculum, there's a big emphasis on children knowing continents, countries, and being able to name. So there's quite a big knowledge aspect, and something like this can be really helpful.
So the next one is, so we quite a lot of kind of geography and world-based apps that we're looking at here. And this one is called Sound Around You. It's a slightly different take on this kind of idea of geography. But basically, this is an app that has connected lots and lots of users across the world, and it's invited them to take short recordings of what they can hear around them. So this time, when we visit a place, we're not necessarily seeing what that place looks like, but what we are doing is listening to short sound samples of what you might hear if you're there. So I'm just going to zoom into a location somewhere and see what we can hear. Yeah, okay, I'll go to there in a second. Well, it varies hugely. So when you click on a sound recording, it gives you, oh sorry, I'm not. Okay. Yeah. Okay. When you click on a location in the world, you get, and I just zoomed in but you couldn't see, so basically it looks like this, and you get all of these different clusters and numbers with arrow flags. And when you click on a pin, it tells you about the sound that you've clicked on. So for example, I think I was down here in Costa Rica. And it looks like it's being a bit slow to load at the moment. So we might not hear it right now, but it tells you a little bit of how users have responded to this particular sound, and it rates them on these different things. I know it's hard to see, so it says things like rate the quality of the sound, rate the quality of the location. Is it an eventful sort of sound, or is it really uneventful? So are we just getting background noise of maybe a cafe, or is it something happening, someone speaking? And it tells us whether people think that it's positive, whether it's tranquil, or whether it's chaotic. Did you want to ask something? Yeah? Well, so I think that it would depend on which sounds you're using. So the sounds that are in here, there's lots of different kinds. So unfortunately, I can't seem to play one of them at the moment. But some of them are more cultural. Some of them, so like for example, I was listening to some of the samples from Dubai, and you could hear the call to prayer in some of those samples. So obviously you'd learn a little bit about the culture of Dubai from hearing those sounds. Or as you said, if you went to Times Square, you might be able to hear lots of people, lots of traffic. So I suppose it's sort of quite similar to using Street View to explore a place, but we're asking children to use their imagination a little bit more. Maybe they can close their eyes, they can listen to the sounds, and they can describe what they think they might see in a location like that. Did you want to ask something? Say that again, sorry. There's a lot of... So actually responding, so in that case, rather than just hearing the ambient sound, you might find recordings of people talking about the location. Yeah, which I think would be really interesting. So again, it's less about the tool and it's more about how you might use the tool. You could use it creatively like that to invite your students to make their own recordings. And also you might choose to sort of find the sounds yourself, select sounds that you think are going to be useful for the learning that you're trying to achieve. Yeah. So you just basically you find them by zooming in on the location, and so you don't necessarily know what the sounds are going to be. But if for example you were studying a particular city or a place in nature, it might be worth just having a look and seeing if there's anything on here, because it could add an interesting dimension to the children's learning. Yeah. Yes, yeah, absolutely. And so that would be a kind of obviously this sort of section is the idea is it's about finding information, but that would then be a way of turning this into a creative experience where the children are actually making the sounds or finding the sounds to record and add to this community. And then they're also acting as collaborators in the digital world, and they're kind of if you use this as a tool for the children to listen to, but then you say to them, now you're going to put a sound on there, that means that they know another child in another country in the world might listen to my sound and might learn something about the place that I live in. And so you're kind of, you're part of an international community in that way. So another really helpful, this is this kind of, on a slightly larger scale now, we're moving outside of Earth and we're going to space. And I wanted to show you this, I just think it's a really, really helpful bank of media and information. So NASA has this image and video library online, and it has lots and lots of a huge collection of things like when they've sent out spacecraft and they've taken images, or some of it is satellite imagery, images of solar events and things like that. And a lot of them are really high quality images, and they make them all available for free online so that you can use them. So if, for example, you were doing a project, we might talk about some examples of this later, but if you were doing a filmmaking project, maybe you were doing an animation, or you were using green screen, and you wanted an image in the background, and you wanted to know that image was copyright free and that it was safe for them to use, because maybe you want to share it yourself, maybe you have a blog or you have a website and you want to share your video. You need to know that the people that own that image are not going to email you and say, hang on, I haven't given you permission to use this. So this bank of media is really, really helpful for making sure that you do have permission to use. And it's also just very interesting. Obviously, NASA, having a space program, have access to some really interesting some really interesting locations. So at the moment, I'm searching for images, video, and audio, but I can. Sorry. Jeez, again. Yeah. Pixabay, yeah. 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 Yeah, that's a good one. We use that quite a lot. And another one is Wikimedia as well. The images used in Wikipedia. So there's a few websites that are very, very helpful. Obviously, this one's a bit unusual because a website like Pixabay might not have access to this type of image, and you can get quite high quality images of things like the solar system and space. The next app that I wanted to show you, or the next tool, is Duolingo. And so this is a nice one because it's you can use it on a phone or on an iPad or on a computer. It works with virtually any kind of technology that can access a browser. And are people familiar with Duolingo a little bit? Does anyone? Yeah, a couple of people. Yeah, so I use it personally just to try to to brush up on some of my language skills. But it's also a really great tool for schools. And Duolingo, so it's a language learning app, and as you can see, this is my French course. I haven't been doing very much French recently. I need to get on with my homework a little bit. But it breaks it down into these different categories, and it tests you, and it gives you little challenges to complete. It sends you reminders to help you to keep up your practice. And it also is really good at tracking which things you need a little bit more practice on. So it remembers if you haven't looked at a set of words for a few weeks, it will often prompt you to revise on those words. So it's just a really nice system. It's very easy, user-friendly and easy to navigate, and just a well-designed tool.
Yeah. I mean, I think some of these things, they kind of have freemium, so there's a certain point where you have to pay. And I would probably suggest that using Duolingo might be something that you encourage students to do in their own time, to supplement what you might be teaching in class. So really kind of for practice. But I think it is also an example of the way that things are going. And again, Alan talked about this yesterday, in terms of kind of personalised feedback, individual feedback for students, and technology is going to help us do that more and more in the future.
So this is, I've just logged in with an account that I don't have a Duolingo account, so that you can see how it looks when you first start. So you can just choose your course. Maybe I want to learn Danish. And then what it will do is it will ask me, before I do anything else, it will ask me to take a placement test. So it's like a quick test to help the app to work out if I already know a little bit about this language. In this case, I do not. I don't really know any Danish. And then, so here we go. So I'd have the placement test, and then when I select that, then it's going to start asking me some questions to find out what my Danish knowledge might be like. And probably I'm going to find that I start from scratch if I try and test this out. So yes, so as Sarah said, it might be that children are just using this with their own individual accounts, and that they're kind of tracking their progress. You can also compare, you can kind of add people as friends and then compare your progress to other people, and it gives you points for the number of times that you practice, and gives you a little league table to show who's done the most practice. And so me and some of my friends have got quite into sort of comparing how we've been getting on with it, and I can imagine children finding that quite interesting and exciting as well. So those are some kind of just useful and helpful resources that point you in the direction of very specific content and information. But also I think it's useful to have a little bit of a tool set in terms of websites where you can go to get children to do their own research, so find out their own information. One of them is Kidrex. So Kidrex is Google's child-friendly, child-safe search engine. It doesn't mean that it's advert-free. It does have adverts, but it filters results to try to make sure that they're appropriate, and it's also presented in a way that's quite easy to understand and visually appealing for young people. There is also a simple version of so any Wikipedia page that you can find. If you write simple dot in front of the URL, it gives you a simple version, a simple language version. I'm not certain whether this is available in Arabic, but it's certainly available in English. But that might be helpful anyway, because it could be that if you're teaching English, it might be helpful to have a simple English version rather than more complex language. Yes. So this is a really interesting question, which Sarah and I were talking about a little bit earlier on. So it's not a reliable source compared with an academic journal or a textbook that has been thoroughly researched by a university. But it is actually a relatively reliable website, because in thinking about the world of websites can be made by anyone in the world, and there are many websites which are not very reliable, as we all know. Some of those websites are even news websites, and they may not be very impartial, they may have biases, they may present information that's inaccurate. And that doesn't mean Wikipedia, I'm not saying that Wikipedia doesn't fall into that category, or that we shouldn't read it with a little bit of skepticism and be cautious about the information that we find. But actually, because Wikipedia has such an enormous bank of people that contribute to it, and many of those people, and because also you have to cite the information that you put on Wikipedia. You can't just write an unsubstantiated statement, you always have to give your references. And then if you want to explore those references further, you can find out whether or not you think they're reliable. So you're still using judgment while you're reading it. But actually, compared with many websites, Wikipedia has a huge amount of information, and mistakes tend to get picked up pretty quickly. So what I would say, and I would say this with any of these tools and any research activity with children online, is if we're developing their critical literacy, we need to make sure that they're aware that websites are just made by human beings like us, and that human beings make mistakes. If you look at one website and you're not sure if it's accurate enough, I would probably go and look at another website, compare the result that you get. If there are inconsistencies, then probably you need to do a little bit more digging to make sure that you've got the correct information. But yeah, so I'd say take it with a pinch of salt. With all websites, do your research and look around. But relatively speaking, Wikipedia is pretty reliable. It's not too bad.
And just to add, in terms of that kind of explicit teaching of search, again, now in our computing curriculum in England, that is part of the national curriculum, that we have to teach children how to search. We have to make sure that they understand the kind of the technology behind search, but also the bias in search. And so we do a lot of activities with children around things like fake news and looking at websites and knowing, for example, if you search for Martin Luther King, one of the sites that comes at the top is actually a site which is created by the Ku Klux Klan, specifically for students. So it's written in a kind of child-friendly way, and it's really, really unpleasant white supremacist opinion. So spending some really explicit time on teaching children how to search. And we haven't put it in the presentation, but there are some resources by a UK organisation called ChildNet, and they have a PowerPoint there called Trust. I think it's called Trust Me. We can add it to the slides, which we'll email out to people. But that's got things that you can do with children around search. Sort of how you teach search.
Okay, and then so the thing is that learning searching skills is really, really important, but sometimes when children are a little bit younger, helping them to distinguish between which websites are and are not reliable can be really difficult. So it's also very helpful as teachers for us to have kind of a bank of websites that we know are pretty trustworthy. We know that we're going to get good information, that information is going to be represented in a way that children can understand. And for that, I often use DK Find Out. DK Find Out it's an encyclopedia website, and it just has pages on lots and lots of different things, and you can find all sorts of information, and it tends to be represented in a way that is quite easy to understand. Dorling Kindersley. So it looks like this, and from this page we can learn a little bit about, maybe we can learn about dinosaurs and prehistoric life. That takes us to this page, and then we can have a look at some pictures of fossils, and there are often kind of interactive images that you can click on and find out more, so it takes you from one page to the next. It also has a selection of games and quizzes, so that once you've learnt about something you can then test your knowledge and see whether you've remembered things. And then all of the text is also written in language which is quite simple and quite easy to understand. So if you want to sort of enable children to do their own research, but you also want to know that they're using websites that you can trust, something like this, DK Find Out, can be really helpful. So before we have a little bit of a chance to try these things out, there's just a couple more things I'm going to mention. I don't think that they necessarily merit demonstration, but it's just worth being aware of them. One of them is DuckDuckGo, because I'm aware that I've mentioned a lot of Google tools, and of course lots of Google tools are free, but then also we know that part of the reason that those tools are free is that they save a lot of our data, and some people prefer to keep their data private. And if you do, you can use this search engine called DuckDuckGo, and basically when you make searches it doesn't record your results, it doesn't save the information. So it's kind of about privacy. There's also a service called ViewPure. I think it's viewpure.com, and basically all you need to do on that website is copy and paste a YouTube link into a little bar, and then it will give you a link which doesn't have any adverts and doesn't have any recommended videos down the side. I find that really helpful because sometimes I use videos when I'm teaching, but sometimes you might get something pop up that's distracting or maybe even not appropriate, and also you might get an advert at the beginning that you don't really want the children to have to sit through. So ViewPure is really helpful for that. And then finally also there's this button which is new to some of the, or relatively new to some of the Google apps. It's called the Explore button, and basically if you're in a Google app and you see that, you can click on it and it will enable you to gather up useful information. So for example, if you're making a presentation in Google Slides, if you click Explore, maybe you're making a presentation about cats, you can search for cats and you'll get some pictures of cats which are all copyright free, and you'll get some bits of information that have been kind of gathered up using Google's search algorithms. So it's just a simple way of gathering up lots of information into one place so that you can use it. So I'll show you an example. Basically, if I show you so this is the so here we are. So it's just this button here, and then so this is just a template for the presentation. So if I click on that button, then I can search, and it will search my saved documents in Google, but it will also search the web. So I can search for cat. So here's the web section which shows me information. Here's the images section, and that corresponds with Google's labelled for reuse, labelled for non-commercial reuse results. So they're already automatically filtered so that you can use them. And you can search your drive as well if you have things saved onto your drive. So it's just quite a simple way of gathering up information. And if you're doing, so thinking about if you were doing a research project with children, it might be that they're making a presentation about a country and you want them to be able to access everything from one page because maybe their mouse skills are not that good and it will be confusing for them if they're moving between different tabs. So it's just quite helpful to pull everything together in that way. Okay, so we're going to have a little bit of time for people to try out some of the things that I've shown you so far, so just about 5 minutes or so. I think that, so some of the laptops have been charging, so those that are charged enough will come and bring round. If you have something with you, if you have an iPad or a laptop with you, then please feel free to use that, but I've put the names of the apps on the screen, so just have an explore, have a go and ask questions if there's anything you're not sure about. Okay, so I hope you've had a chance to have a little bit of a look at some of those tools. Okay. I hope you had a chance to have a little look. We will have a bit more of an opportunity to explore some other tools in a minute, but I'm just going to move on so that I can talk you through some of those tools, because so far we've mostly been focusing on how to collect information, how to gather information. But next we're going to have a bit of a think about how we can use that information to create things and to make our own content. So I'll start with a few apps and tools that you can use for presenting information. It might be that you've done an experiment and you've collected some data and you want to represent that data, or it might be that you've taken some photos of an activity in your class and you want to represent those photos in an exciting way. The first one is this website that's called Create a Graph, and the URL is just up there. So basically you can use, once you've gathered up a bit of information, a bit of data, you can select from a range of different types of diagram. You've got bar, line, area, pie, and an XY graph. And then you can plot that data in a really kind of visually appealing and very, very simple, easy to understand kind of way. So I find that a really helpful tool in maths and in science particularly. The next one, this is an app. So it's an app which is on the red iPads that we've brought with us if anyone wants to try it. You can also use it in a browser. There is a free, it's a bit like Sarah said before, that it's one of those things where there's a free version and a paid version. In the free version, you can only create one thing at a time. Personally, you use it to make like a diagram a bit like this. And then once you've made it, you can then export it as a JPEG image. Personally, I don't find it a problem that you can only make one thing at a time, because usually if I use it with children, they will create whatever they're making in one session, they will export it, and then actually it's quite good that it deletes it for the next user. But if you wanted to be able to have lots of active documents that children could go back to and continue working on, then you may wish to pay for a paid account. In this particular example, this comes from a workshop that we do where we use Raspberry Pis, and at the beginning of the session children have to put together their own computer using components on their desk. So basically their task was to create a set of instructions for how to build a computer. And as they built theirs, they took photos and they labelled each photo to show what stage of that process they were up to. The next one, which is also an app, and this is also on the iPads, and this is an iPad only, so it's more useful if you have mobile technology. But it's basically a way that you can make short videos using images, and you record yourself speaking, and while you're speaking you can also move things around on the screen, or you can draw things. So this particular example is a maths example, which is a video a child made showing how to find the area of a rectangle. I'll just very quickly show you a bit of that film. Oops. Or maybe I won't. Yeah, they've changed their branding actually recently. Okay, the video doesn't seem to be working on this laptop, but basically it's really good for sort of creating tutorials and like kind of moving diagrams. Really, you can do things like stretch the picture and make it smaller. You can label diagrams with arrows and numbers. Yeah, so they're kind of developing their communication skills and their language skills, as well as because it's kind of they're writing instructional language and they're delivering instructional language, as well as whatever the content is that they are trying to convey, so the learning that they're discussing. And similarly, there's a few more kind of slightly artistic examples that I've got here as well. This is an app called Puppet Pals HD. Again, this is on the iPads. And this is an app which, it has a free version, and there are just the functions available in the free version, there aren't as many. Basically, children can make a sort of a puppet show using a gallery of images which are installed in the app. And again, the video doesn't seem to want to play. But this was an example where the children were tasked with explaining the water cycle through video. So they had some different objects and different characters, and they moved them around and they described them. In the paid version, you can also take photos with this app, which means that you can do things like you could take a selfie of yourself and you could put yourself into a story, or you could draw a character on paper, take a photo of it, and then put it into the app and kind of cut around it to give it its own outline. So it can be really nice for storytelling. It's very user-friendly, so we sometimes use it with children aged sort of 5 to 7, but you can use it in much more advanced ways as well with older children. So I like this one because you could sort of, once they know how to use it, you can just get them doing more and more complex things with it as they get older. So in this particular example, well, in this example, the children would be making the diagram themselves. So, or it might be that you have a picture of the background, they take a picture of the background, and then it's their job to add in the labels. So they're very much creating the detail themselves. So it's kind of designed for making stories, but as I said, this example was about the water cycle. So it's really moving pictures and recording your voice over the top, a little bit like that one really. It's quite a similar thing. So it's designed to be a storytelling app, and the characters that come with it are little cartoon characters, but you could use it in many ways. It might not just be storytelling. The next one is an animation app which is called Stopmotion Studio. So there are lots of apps around that do a very similar job, and they allow you to create simple stop motion animations by just taking a series of photographs, moving things a little bit at a time, and then putting them together into a short animation. And again, we use this with very young children, but you can do more complex things with older children as well. And yeah, the key thing is that you always have to move your hand out of the way before you take the next picture. And that means that children tend to have to work together in groups and be really cooperative and communicate really well as they're making their animation, to make sure that they move things the right amount and that they don't kind of get their hands in the way and things. And again, the video's not playing, but this was an example of a film. Do you want to talk about it a little bit, Sarah, this particular?
Yeah, so this is just a shot from a film. Some 7-year-olds worked on a film about their local market, Brixton Market. They went to visit the market, they spoke to the market stall holders, they took photographs, they drew pictures. They then came back to school, they made a story, and then they made little puppets with paper, they animated it, and then they did a voiceover. So it was a big, long project, but you can also do animations that are very short. And I just wanted to say that some of the schools that we work with, initially they were only able to buy one iPad for a school, so one iPad for 300 children. But with careful planning, they were able to use that iPad and take it in turns to use it in different classes and to do group work. So I think even though it is an expensive tool, sometimes you can make a piece of technology go a long way. So again, lots of people talk about one-to-one iPads. Well, actually, we've seen schools do really lovely projects with one iPad. And also we at our centre, we lend equipment to schools. So some schools don't buy anything, they just borrow it from us for a few weeks. But if that one iPad goes into every classroom and is being used every hour of the teaching week, you can do quite a lot with one device.
Yeah, and just to mention a little bit about how you might structure a project like the one that Sarah described, where you may be using one device across many, many children. I suppose the important thing about something like animation is that much of the learning happens during the planning and writing process rather than during the making of the actual animation. So you might have a class of maybe you've got 30 children and they work in groups, and each group, it's their job to plan part of the film and also to create all of the characters and to make a storyboard describing exactly what's going to happen. And all of those things you can do without access to the technology. It's only the final stage where you actually put it together and you take the photos where you need to use that device. So it can be quite a nice way of collaborating, allowing children to create something as a group that they wouldn't be able to achieve on their own. Yes, often that's what we would do. So for example, if you were telling a story, and it might be a story that you've been reading with the children, it might be a story that has individual pages or chapters that you could break it down into, and then the children could recreate that themselves through animation. Or they might write their own story. One thing that we sometimes do with children is get them to make sort of information films or documentary films, because documentaries don't necessarily, they can have lots of separate parts that don't have to kind of flow from one to the next. So you might have a documentary that is split up into topics. It's different topics around the same theme. Then maybe each group is given a topic and told, your animation is about this topic, and then at the end, as the teacher, you gather up all of the short videos and make one long video that they all feel like they're a part of. So it's nice for making them feel like they've worked together, but also they're all getting time to think quite deeply about that subject as well. So the next one I was going to show you is Book Creator. This is one which you can use on a computer in a browser. It's also an app, and it is on the iPads that are around the room. Essentially, it lets you create a book, unsurprisingly. You can choose what shape your book is. It could be kind of wide, or it could be square or tall. You can add in text boxes, you can change the background. You can actually also record your voice into the book. So there are two ways that you can save the book when you finish with it. You can export it as a movie, where you basically watch a film of somebody like swiping through the book and you can hear your voice over in the background. Or you can export it as an EPUB, so basically just a digital book which can be opened in iBooks and in other ebook devices. It's not really designed for. There is an app which does do that, which I can come and talk to you about in a minute. It's more for kind of class work. So you can share it with other devices, but it wouldn't. It depends whether you mean commercially or if you just mean sharing it. You can share it. It's not really designed for using it commercially, but it doesn't mean that you couldn't do it, but there are other products that might do it better. Yeah, as an ebook, but you can share the ebook and open it on other apps. It's just, so basically you'd have a file. So if you were going to do it commercially, you'd need to work out which platform you were selling it on. They don't have a commercial platform that they sell the books on. It's just for making the file, really. Yeah. Okay, and then to move on to a kind of different format of creativity, an app that Sarah and I really like is something called CoSpaces, which allows you to create a 3D virtual reality environment. Again, you could use this with the same technology that I mentioned earlier. If you have a phone and you have the Google Cardboard app installed, then you can use CoSpaces. You can create a 3D world, and then you can go into that world using your phone. And that can be a really exciting way. And we were talking a little bit before about how some of the first few tools we showed could act as a stimulus for children to be creative themselves. Perhaps they've read a story, or perhaps they've listened to a sound, and then they might think to themselves, what would the world look like that this sound would come from? Or what would the world look like that this story is set in? Then they can use this app to create a world like that, and that allows them to make their own immersive experience that they can enter with a virtual reality headset. And they can share those between each other. One child can look into another child's piece of work. So the next one is iMovie. This obviously it's a very popular app, and it's now if you have an iPad, it's now free for Mac for Apple technology devices, and it's just a really nice, quite straightforward way of making films. Again, it's something that you can use in a really simple way. If you can record directly into it. One piece of film after another, and you don't even really need to do very much editing to make a film that looks good. Or you can use it in a slightly more complex way, where you're thinking a bit more about the transitions between one shot and the next. You might apply some effects over the image. You might add some music or some sounds into the background and some titles and things like that. So it's just a really nice filmmaking app that you can use for all sorts of different things. I mentioned before that you could do if you did a collaborative animation project between lots of children, iMovie might be the app that you use to gather up all of the videos that they've made separately, so put them all in one place. And that's something that we often do at the CLC. We might have 10 groups of children working on part of a film, and then at the end of the session we connect them all together using iMovie. Thinking a bit about music as well, so this is an online app called Stopmotion Studio. Once again, it's something that has different versions available, and some of them are free and some of them cost money, or one of them is free and some of them cost money. So in the free version, it allows you to sort of mix up different samples of music, and it has a range of short samples and loops that sound like different instruments, and children can kind of mix those together and combine them in a creative way to compose their own piece of music. When you start paying for it, that enables you to do things like record into the app, so that instead of just choosing from the bank of sounds, you're adding in your own sounds as well. It's very, very similar to GarageBand, but it's a browser-based tool, so you don't have to download it, and it's not just for Mac. So you could use that on the Windows computers that you have in front of you at the moment. Exactly, yes. Yeah. So yeah, if you've used GarageBand before, this is really similar. And I would also recommend, if you have Windows computers, having a look into Audacity, because you don't need to be online to use Audacity. You just have to download it, and then it's also free to use. So it's a good one. Sorry. So they're recording their speaking. Yeah, you might use it for that. Obviously, that would mean that you would need to be using the paid version, because if you're recording, you have to have the paid version. But maybe you could use Audacity. You could definitely use, or maybe you might use something like Puppet Pals, where they're recording and they're making characters speak. It could work in a similar way. Lots of these apps have a voice capability in them. Yeah, just capturing short pieces of sound. Yeah. So this is called Isle of Tune. In Isle of Tune is really good fun. I'm going to try and see if I can get it working, but let's just cross our fingers. Basically, I don't think we are. Basically, in Isle of Tune, you create a little loop of road and you add little objects around it, and then there are cars that move around. As this car drives past a tree, it makes one type of sound. As it goes past a lamppost, it makes another type of sound, and so on. And you can use the different types of sound to compose a piece of music by letting that car move around that landscape. So we're composing music, but we're also doing quite a lot of problem solving, and we're doing a bit of computational thinking as well. We're kind of almost programming this car to play a piece of music just by using those different tools. It's really good fun. There are also a lot of examples that are already saved onto the Isle of Tune website that you can have a look at. So there might be popular songs where somebody has managed to use all of these different pieces of street ornamentation to compose a piece of music. Yes, it's a visual. Yeah, it's a visual form of musical notation, kind of a bit like a visual form of programming as well, because you're just making instructions. So once again, we'll have a little bit of time to have a look at some of the things I've shown you. I've gathered them up onto this screen so that you can remember what they're called. Some of them are browser tools, some of them are apps, and if you have questions about any of them, then please feel free to ask us. Off you go. Yeah, you can use Book Creator on the red iPads or on your computer if you have a computer. Okay, there's just a couple of little, a few more things that I wanted to just show you before we finish. So we've already talked a little bit about making. Hello. Good. Okay, thank you. We talked a little bit about lots of different ways that you can create multimedia, kind of animations and films and videos and music. But I think it's also really important to have just a little bit of a mention of programming and computer science as well, partly because it's something that I feel very passionately about, but also because I think that when we're talking about helping children to participate in a digital world, I feel that it's really important that children have an understanding of how that digital world is created, of how it works and what's going on underneath. If they're using lots of different technology, lots of different apps, I think it's important that they start to ask questions about what's going on behind and how those apps are working. So I'm just going to briefly mention some tools that you could use with children of different ages if you want them to start to learn a little bit about programming. And the first one is Scratch Junior. So Scratch and Scratch Junior are block-based programming languages that were developed by MIT University, and they basically consist of these sort of colourful blocks, and you can clip them together to make the characters do certain things. So this character will start at the beginning and it will follow the instructions from left to right, and we can start to incorporate different commands in order to get the characters to interact, and you can use this to make a short animation. And we use this with children probably up to about age 7. And then once they get a little bit older, we start to use something called Scratch, which is very similar, but a little bit more complex. And instead of arrows, a lot of the blocks have words and numbers in them instead. And you can start using Scratch to create interesting patterns using mathematical knowledge. This particular activity, and I know it's hard to see from where you're sitting, but essentially we created a set of 4 pieces of programming, and each of them draws one of those pictures, but they're all jumbled up. So often one of the first things that we'll do with children when they start to use Scratch to get them a bit familiar with it is show them an example, ask them to see if they can read and they can use their logical reasoning to predict which of these scripts might match with which of the pictures, even without a knowledge of programming. Oh, yeah. Can you guys see? I don't know whether you can. I think it might be. It's a little bit blurry, so I'm not sure that people will be able to see. Yeah. So, or actually, a good example is the fact that this particular script has this light green block. And you might not see what it says, but it says pick random. This one says pick random 1 to 100, pick random 1 to 50. So which of those shapes? Sorry? It's the range of the random number. So it's like choose a random number between 1 and 100. So this block says set pen color to pick random 1 to 100, and it basically, or 1 to 200 in fact. So it means in Scratch there's a library of colors. There's 200 colors. Basically, this block just means pick a random color. So knowing that, what would that tell you about the pictures, do you think? Any guesses? Which of those might have a random color? It's also got random movement and random turning. I know you know. Yeah? So yeah, you could use it with characters. So basically, you have a character on the screen, and you give it instructions and tell it to move around. You usually start with a cat, but you could change it to do whatever you want. And then as it moves around, it draws the shape. So this one has drawn a shape by making all of these lines. That one's drawn a kind of a star shape. That one's drawn lots and lots of dots. This particular program creates the shape with lots of dots because it gets the character to choose random colours and choose random locations. So you can start to, even without knowing a huge amount about programming, you can start to make judgments based on just your logical reasoning and your prediction skills. And while we're talking about programming, I am going to mention the Scratch Maths curriculum because I've personally found it really, really helpful for my teaching of programming. This is, it was a set of resources developed for a research project by University College London, and we helped to deliver the training for that research. And while I was learning about it, I was like, wow, this is amazing, this is really interesting. It's really helping me to understand maths a little bit better. And it basically breaks down the English maths curriculum into steps and teaches them through programming concepts. There are lots of resources for teachers to help them understand how to teach this, and I just think it's really good, so I'm just recommending it. It comes with things like, these are some printable resources that you can, like posters and things like that, worksheets that children can use. Yeah.
Yeah, so with those materials, again, even if you had no technology in your school and you wanted to introduce a coding curriculum, you could encourage children to just go through those step by step through those materials, and if they went through them, even it would be better if they have teaching support, but even if they took themselves through them, they would be able to program in a very clear way. So we thoroughly recommend those materials, all completely free.
And then a slightly different way of thinking about programming is using something called Sonic Pi. Sonic Pi is a programming language which is based in the language Ruby, but you can use it in quite simple ways by creating very simple series of commands to make your own music. So for example, you could play a tone and you can choose a number to decide how high that tone is, and then pause and then play a tone and then pause, and gradually you can create your own musical compositions. I've used this with children and they often take great pleasure in trying to recreate songs that they all know and love and seeing if they can figure out the program behind it. Similarly with text-based programming, if any of you are familiar with Python, there's a website called Trinket that allows you to make Python scripts for free online and then share them. You don't have to download any software, you can just do it in a browser, so this is another thing that I find a really helpful tool and really easy to use. So we're just about to finish, but before we do, I'll just quickly mention a few apps that we sometimes use to help us to share content and collaborate between children at the CLC. There's a website that's called Padlet. It's difficult to demonstrate it without lots of people in it at the same time, but essentially it's a page which everyone can access with one link, and if you double click on it you can make a post that everyone else can see. So we often use this at the beginning of an activity to gather up lots of ideas in one place at a time. I'll say to the children, every child make a post, tell me what you think about this, and then they will all make their own addition to it. Yeah, exactly. Send them home with the link. There's also an app called Seesaw, which lets people make posts into like a live feed, which is private within your class. So you can ask children to submit their work. You can review it, so it doesn't automatically get approved. So you can check it's all appropriate and you're happy with it, and then they can comment on each other's work as well. Really good for assessment because you can look back over one child's work, and we use it in a project that supports children in learning about metacognition, so learning about their own learning. And then finally, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Kahoot. This is another one that you can use on phones and on iPads, on computers. Basically, it allows you to create a quiz game online, and then you share a short number code with your class, and you can get everybody to participate in that quiz at the same time. And then on your screen as a teacher, you'll be able to see the progress of the different children. They can watch themselves progress and compare, see how they're getting on, kind of compete with each other, and it can be really, really good fun. So We haven't really got half a minute. I think your phone's a bit slow. Is that right? It's 1:45 now, isn't it? Yeah. But yeah, I would very much recommend taking the time to have a little bit of a look if you can. So just make a note. And just to finish off, just basically, we're always thinking when we're using technology about what is it adding, how are we changing the learning experience for our pupils. I hope that's been useful. Thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of your day.